Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I'm going to give everyone a couple more minutes to join. So we're going to go ahead and start the webinar at 2 minutes after the hour. So just please sit tight. I'll give you a 1-minute countdown as well. All right, everybody, we're going to go ahead and get started in 1 minute. Just give the latecomers a chance to get connected up. All right, everybody, let's go ahead and get started. So thanks for coming to today's webinar, Assessment and Certification Pitfalls, How Your Policies Could Cause You to Fail. There is so today we're going to be talking about Exostar's Policy Pro. And if you'd like to follow Sean along as he does the demonstration, there is a link to the Policy Pro trial in the YouTube description. If you'd like to go ahead and get that downloaded and up and running, it takes about 2 minutes. You'll have that time as we go through the housekeeping and introductions. So I would encourage you to go ahead and do that. So before we started, just a couple housekeeping items before we go. So today's webinar is scheduled to last 45 minutes to an hour, including the question and answer session. A large portion of the event will be dedicated to answer those questions from the audience. We'll be answering the questions that were submitted prior to today's event. I've got those here with me. If for some reason there is an outage of your broadcast, just wait a few minutes and refresh the page and it should link back up. We are recording the session and it will also be available for you. For your convenience, there is a link in the YouTube description to a glossary of commonly used terms, acronyms, and initializations that will be referenced during today's webinar. As I mentioned, this webinar is being recorded. It'll be available on demand via the Exostar resource library. That can be found at www.exostar.com/resources post-event, as well as this YouTube link from the email that you received at any time. To speak with one of our industry experts or to request a copy of the slide deck that we use today, please reach out to us at cmmc-team@exostar.com, or if you go to the Exostar website at www.exostar.com, there's a live chat feature. You can request it there from whoever you're chatting with at the time as well. So I'm joined on today's webinar by Sean Fornwalt. Sean serves as the Director of Client Technical Support at ISMS Solutions and ISMS Applications. He's a member of the Policy Pro Development and Quality Assurance teams. He'll be driving the demonstration today. So today, just to give everyone a heads up, we'll be doing the live demo. And as Sean goes through, he'll also show you the updates that are coming as Policy Pro updates to the CMMC 2.0 standards, if you will. This is one of those great things about a SaaS application. We keep the application updated as things change. So this will be your, if you will, the second preview of those changes that are upcoming. Since last month, we also provided some screenshots of those. Sean will be able to show them to you today in action, if you will. So Sean, with that, I will let you take it away.
Well, thank you very much, Kevin. And just like Kevin said, it's going to look a little bit different if you've been to one of these before. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the changes coming to the Policy Pro platform in the near future. Now, as everyone knows, the best laid plans don't always survive contact with the enemy. We were looking at getting it out this weekend, but it will unfortunately be about another week at the 20 or on the the last weekend of May, and we'll have the new site up and ready to go. And our primary concern around this was the data that's going to be moving, and I'll explain how that's going to affect your accounts following this upcoming update. But as we can see right now, I do have two different platforms up. So I have our typical platform.ismsapplications.com. This is our live or production platform that all of the users are going into. And then on the right side of your screen, you're going to see the Policy Pro on our staging environment instead. And this is where, before we put it to the live, we put it on this server, we test it, we make sure that there aren't going to be any issues or, data that will get screwed up or changed, so that, because again, you have done all the work that you have done within the platform as a user of it, and we want to respect that. But also, with Kevin, or with what Kevin said earlier, we are continually updating it. We're putting security features, we're changing the content according to any regulatory standard changes. So now we're going to jump right in and go through the demo, looking at it from two different perspectives. So we're going to go ahead here. We're going to come to the platform.ismsapplications.com. That URL will continue to be used after the update. You'll come here, you'll enter in your credentials, or if you need to find a trial, you can go to the Exostar website and under their product section and go to Policy Pro, and you will be able to sign up for a 14-day free trial. But with that in mind, we're going to hop right in now. We're going to click sign in on both of these platforms. Now, I will be a little, upfront about this. The one on the right is a little bit slower because it doesn't have quite the resources that our production platform does. And this is going to be one of our first changes that we see. So what we have right now is that I signed in and I went right to my dashboard on on the staging platform, where on the left, I have to come in and make a choice. And, every time I would come in, I would have to make the choice of what I'm going to look at and then hit continue. Now, the other one, it remembers what I came into the last time. Because the way that we've changed the platform is that we've approached it from the perspective of the 171 and the level 2 under the 2.0 are pretty much the same thing, with a couple of extra steps for certification or, assessments to make sure that your compliance is actually there. But what we can see now is on the dashboard itself, everything looks very, very similar. So we're looking at the 171 on the left and the 2.0 level 2 on the right. You'll see that we have the same 14 domains here on our document relevance dashboard, and this is where we're going to be able to see the scores of all the different documents that we've uploaded into our account. Now, the biggest difference that we can see when we're looking at these two things side by side is that the staging version of it, or the one on the right, has a little decal or button on it. And what happened is we put this in place because as we were combining the level 2 from 2.0 and the 171, we had users that had worked in the two separate modules on their documentation. So what we've done is we've combined these together and then put a notification for what standard was this document tested under. Because access control, not a lot of difference between level 3 or level 2 between the 1.0 and the 2.0 and the 171. They all have 21 controls, or I'm sorry, 22 controls or practices. So there's not a lot of, issue with dealing with something like this. But say we have asset management, a completely new domain that came with the 1.02 that is no longer there. So we don't have that anymore, so it's not on the platform. But what we do have, and we're going to go take a look at our policy builder and everything else just like we normally do. But we have our government analysis here. We have our questions that'll tell us, should we start in assessment? Should we start in the policy builder? And what we're going to do now is walk through the policy builder and take a look at what the changes are and how to use it to help build out from the template document provided a policy that really represents what the organization that you're with is, doing to maintain their cybersecurity. So we're going to go ahead and click on Policy Builder in both of these. And again, there's not a lot of change between how it used to be and how it is now. Most of the changes are going to come down to numbering, to ordering, things that changed in the 2.0 level 2 that weren't there for the 171. But there's not a whole lot of that, so it is going to look very similar as we look into it. So we're going to go ahead. I clicked continue on the left, but I do want to point out here on the right that we have our prepare, gather, and our consult, because we understand that you may not be a cybersecurity expert, that you just got voluntold to do this by someone at your job. You have no idea what you're doing, but you have to do it anyway. And I've talked to hundreds of people that are in the exact same situation, and that's who we've designed this particular part of the platform to assist. Because the prepare section here is going to give us a high level understanding of what this particular policy family or domain is trying to achieve, and what might be involved, what we might have to get together. But then once we go down to our gather section, we're going to get a primer list of different types of documentation that we already have that will be helpful in answering some of the compliance questions of the standard we're working with. So again, it's not a full list, but you might have a large part of the information in the documents that you already possess. It's just figuring out where those documents are and how they affect your cybersecurity. And then once we go from the gather to the consult, this is where we understand that you will need to have people to talk to. It doesn't have to be a consultant or some expert, but you need to talk to some people within your organization, any kind of third-party contractors that have anything to do with your IT, so that when you're making policy decisions, you can do that so that it hits as many, or it dots as many I's as you can, realistically, because not everyone's going to like what the policy the policy change proposed is, and they're going to say, no, I don't want to do that. That adds work to my day. I just don't want to do it. It's not worth the time. So now your job as a policy writer is to come up with a compromise in order to make sure that you are covering what you have to cover while not impeding your workforce to an onerous degree. But what we're going to do now is click to get started in the staging side here. And as we can see, there is starting to be some differences between the Policy Pro that we are using today on the live platform and the one that's coming in the next week or so. And as we can see here, we have all the same information up top. Right here, we have the organization name, we have the organization name. Department, all that stuff is the same. But what we have is we've moved up some of the information about this to the top of the screen here. So you have a little bit more instruction as to what you're supposed to do with this as you go through the process of changing this template document into a policy document for your organization. Now, Kevin, unfortunately, I'm going to have to move your head a little bit so I can see what I'm doing. But what we're going to do now is walk through the different parts of the policy builder, export out a document so that we can see what the final product looks like, and then we'll go back to the assessment and take a look at the score of that document. But what we have here, like I said, is just a little bit of structural change. Everything's broken up slightly differently. Here we have groupings of related controls, because in the 171, you would have your derived controls. And that's how we originally set it up. But through listening to our users and taking their suggestions, frustrations, and just, ideas in, we've made a change to where now each individual practice or control is by itself. You're not going to have to try to figure out how does this work with that, or how does this do this. Each one is its own step. So now it's truly control by control construction of a policy document, instead of having to come out with some 120-page policy document to cover everything. We can work on this a little bit at a time. We can find out how we're doing. We can check it in the assessment and get some more information and resources in the reference library. And we'll get there in just a second. But the same way to edit is going to be, present. We have our little edit button. We'll go ahead and click that on both of them. And as we can see, the text editors are the same. There's no change there, just that we only have the one control, not the two separate controls. So now we're going to go ahead and close these down. And once we've gone ahead and made the changes that we want to in the text editor, we're going to export this document out. So one of the questions that I frequently get is, well, why do I have to use the text editor? Well, to be frank, you don't. It's there if you want to use it. It keeps it on our storage systems on the GovCloud, or you can export out the pure template language and just work on it on your local system in a word processor. Both ways are completely valid, and one is not better than the other. The best thing we can do is get the policy written and get the controls implemented. So the way that we're going to do this is the same between these two. We're going to export out the document, and in the effort of just trying to save my sanity, I'm only going to do one. And then we're going to go ahead and take a look and see that this is a list of everything that we have not changed in this particular template. And in this case, it's pretty much everything that we have not touched. And I can still export out that document just fine. And as we look at it, we're going to see that we took all the individual practices and controls here, and we have our 3.1.1, all right? Or we have our AC.L1-3.1.1. Just depends on which standard you're working from. And then as we come down, we're going to see the 0.2, and now we're going to see the 0.20, because this is in CMMC, structure, where we are going through everything in level 1, and then we're going through everything in level 2. So again, we're putting everything in an appropriate order. We're labeling everything so that you can go through just by exporting out the template and write yourself a policy that truly reflects how your organization is handling its cybersecurity. Now, this is all well and good. I can print out a document, I can make changes to it, but how do I know if I'm even in the game at all? If I'm just completely out in left field, or I know what I'm doing? And that there's a big gap between those things. And what we're going to do is we're going to go over to our policy assessment on the left-hand nav here, and this is going to open up our policy assessment. Now, I apologize that things look a little squished here. If we were to actually expand it out, this is what it would look like. So the spacing, just because we're pushing two windows together, is a little bit, weird. But what we're going to do now is we're going to scroll down to the bottom of this list of uploaded documents, and we're going to see our Upload New or Revised Document button. And here again, we can see there's a little bit of a difference. Here we just have, 3.1 access control, but here we have the standard that we wrote it with, or that we assessed it against, right? So if we use the old Policy Pro's policy assessment feature for the NIST 800-171 R2, then it will indicate that to us on our assessment. That way we know this came when we were working on this standard. And if we scroll down, we only have the one here. Oh, we do have another one. So this one is a CMMC 1.0 level 3. So now I know that I assessed this document when I was working on that standard. So there may be extra stuff in there that I don't need. Now, access control, that's not the case because it stayed 22 the entire time. But things like Media protection, they took one out, they put it in recovery, they got rid of recovery, and they sent it back. So it might be different. And that's why we're telling you what this score represents is what you were testing it against. Now, we're going to go down here to the bottom of it, and this is really going to show the difference in speed here. But I'm going to go ahead and upload that document that I just chose. And as you can see, there's just some minor, visual differences here, but everything works the same and everything's in the same general position. So we're going to attach the document. And then once we have the document that we want, we checked it, we feel that we're good to go, we're going to hit submit. Now, if for some reason we don't, we clicked the wrong file or we did something wrong, we can always clear that out, reattach a new one, and we can also attach multiple documents here. So if you have a password policy, an account creation policy, but you don't have an access control policy, you can put those documents together and it will score it as though it was a singular document. So we're going to go ahead and hit our submit button here. Now we see that we have a little bit of a difference here. We got a blue message down here, we got a little white message down here, both telling us that it was uploaded, but we also have a confirmation that the document was uploaded. So we'll hit OK on that. And now we have our score. So as we can see, I have 72, or I'm sorry, numbers some days, 67.2 on the old platform for the NIST 171. And we have the 2.0 level 2 on the new updated platform coming in at the exact same score. So if I was working on my NIST documentation, it's going to be the same thing that I would be assessing a level 2 document against. And that's why, since we've known about this, starting back in November of 2021, we've always recommended working on the NIST first. And then the CMMC is that next step that you can take when we're getting closer to that implementation date, which is rumored to be roughly maybe 9 to 12 months away. So we want to make sure, and again, that's a speculation, that's not guaranteed, but we have about a year to get this in order and to get our basically our ducks in a row so we can keep being defense contractors. So now that we've looked at it, we have our score. And, I'm looking at this going, yeah, but a 67 is not really a good score. But we're not using an academic grading scale, right? We're looking at relevance to the standard itself. So this document is covering roughly 65 to 70% of everything I have to cover. So how is that any better? Well, here's the thing. Every DIB contractor, right? Every DoD contractor is going to have the exact same requirements for their cybersecurity policy and implementation. How you do that is up to you. If you can't afford to retrofit everything with Cisco and to run a QRadar scene product for, one of them's $80,000 to $90,000 a year and the other one's probably a good 30,000, and it's not the order you think it's in. The seam product is much more expensive than the other one. But anyway, we're all businesses. We all have to work within a finite budget of how much, resource and capital we can expend to keep the ability to remain a defense contractor. So maybe, you're going to go and do the bare minimum for now, and as things take off, we work to make it better, right? We have to meet the same requirements, bar none. That's what the assessors will be looking for when they're doing that certification assessment. How we get there is up to us. So what Policy Pro focuses on is not, is it meeting the hard and fast requirement? We're saying, is it relevant to what we're covering? Anything above a 50% is considered to be covering a majority of the key items required, so it's considered a good document. I've had some folks that have scored 60% and passed their audits with flying colors. I've had folks that had 80% and they have one or two issues that pop up. So the score here is just to let you know how much or how relevant this particular document is. But in order to get a better sense of what we're missing, I am going to go and take a real quick look here at our detailed scorecard, because this initial one, while helpful, isn't as helpful as it could be. So we're going to go ahead and click on this link right here where it says click to see your detailed scorecard, and a similar one here. And as we can see, there was an adjustment in the scoring. While the score was the same, the document that I exported out from the new platform, which is again being scored against something I exported from the old platform. So there are some differences in the text itself giving us these differences. But what we can do now is we can look and say, my control specifics, I have Kenny. These are the ones that I need to make sure are covered in a significant way. The general ones are typically found in a document of this type, but aren't tied directly to the standard itself, so they're more recommended. But how do we use the control specific to help build out our policy? So what we have here is, again, we have different lists, so we're not going to have the same thing. But what we can do on the old platform is we can look at the number right here. This is going to tell us exactly where in that document CUI and non-public information should be. And then what we have as well is the discussion right out of the standard where it's talking about what this is talking about, right? It's saying that CUI shall not be put on a publicly accessible system. The key term isn't really clear on that, but that's why the discussion is included, so that you can better understand what you need to do to meet that requirement. Now, on the new setup, it is a little bit different. We have it here where we collapse all of them, but on this one instead, we're going the opposite way and we're expanding them instead. So it's still the same information, maybe even a little bit more information, and it's all here available for you to read, to learn from, and to use to help build out your policy to best represent your organization. So again, just some minor changes back and forth here, but as we're going to go ahead and take a look, because I exported it out of this platform, we're going to take a look at emergency accounts. So it's telling me that it should be found in AC.L1-3.1.1, or for our NIST folks, 3.1.1. That's literally how easy the mapping is between CMMC 2.0 level 2 and 171R2. They put the numbers right in the identifiers for the new standard. So if you have a NIST policy, you know exactly where to put 3.1.1 in your CMMC 2.0 level 2 policy document. But we're going to go ahead, we're going to look in this document in the 3.1.1 section, and it was saying emergency accounts. Okay, well, we have a list right here of all the different types of accounts that we have at this company. And yeah, emergency account isn't specifically listed. So we could do a number of things. We could just add it in where we just, hit return here, and then we go ahead and say emergency accounts. And my spelling is terrible, but that's okay. That's why we have spell check. So now I've now identified that we have specific emergency accounts. I can't just get away with that though, right? I have to then further expand upon my policy and my processes and procedures to explain what is an emergency account, when are they appropriate, who can have them, who issues them, how long are they good for, what level of access do they have. All of these things have to be considered just by adding 2 words to a policy, right? The other way that I could go about doing this is that we're not going to put in emergency accounts. We're going to put it under our temporary accounts, and we'll put includes, emergency accounts. All right, so it's a type of temporary account because we've defined what a temporary account is in our policy already. And I'm making an assumption there or a best guess because, it's listed here, so you would want to explain it. And it is technically a temporary account, so you can put it under that section while you're explaining what a temporary account is, and then just add in the little bit extra about the emergency account. How you put it in here, not really what matters. The structure, the language, whether it's a list format, whether it's narrative format, doesn't really matter. What matters is that you're hitting the requirements of the standard itself for when you get your assessment. Now, I have mentioned that a couple of times now, and I'm not sure everyone's understanding what I mean by requirements or how do I find the requirements. So we're going to go ahead and, we can do this with every single other Kenny in here. We can also export out this entire scorecard so that we can have a PDF of it. But now I want to take a moment and go to our reference library because that's really where we're going to find the best information for what we have to do. So here we have everything broken down by the domain or policy family, and you can take a look at any one of these documents. It takes you to the NIST.gov, right where they reside, where they're updated and maintained, and you can make the decisions for yourself. But if we want to know what the requirements are, we go under the section for NIST standard documents, and we're going to click on the second one, this 800-171A document from NIST. And what this document is the assessing criteria or requirements for CUI. Okay. And then we can go here to our table of contents. I will make this just a little bit bigger so everyone can see it a little bit better. And what we can do is we come to our table of contents and we click on the access control, and it's going to tell us exactly what our requirements are. For 3.1.1, we have to do 6 things. We have to identify all of our authorized users. We have to identify any process acting on behalf of those users. We have to identify devices that are able or authorized to connect. And then we have to provide evidence that these devices are limited in the access they have to the system. These could be logs, these could be any kind of audit material or log, just to get the information there to prove that you're actually doing it, right? Take file access logs that keep track of who's accessing the sensitive material in the organization so that you can better keep an eye on that only the people who are supposed to see the CUI are the only ones that see it. But this will go through every single one of the NIST 171 controls, and they also reference back to this on the current documentation page for the level 1 and 2 assessment guides for CMMC 2.0. So we can go to this, I can see what I am required to do in black and white, and then I can try to implement an industry best practice or some other technology to help me protect the information in that particular way. But that's one way that we can do what we can do with the platform itself. The other thing is we've changed the way that the platform is split now. So we've talked a lot about the level 2 because that is going to be one of the more common levels required. But it's really kind of detrimental to not mention the level 1 when over 140,000 members of the DIB are looking at possibly being level 1. So what we've done now is instead of it being split with NIST on one side of the platform and CMMC on the other, we've combined the level 2 CMMC from 2.0 with the NIST 171 because of their identical nature. And then we said, you know what? The way that it was set up before, I had to go and I had to pull up all this information. I had to figure out which ones I needed. So we took all of that input from our users and from Exostar and from our other distributors and said, we're just going to show you what you need for level 1, and that's it. If you're doing level 1, you don't need all the rest of the stuff. You don't need to try to filter through it. So here's just the level 1 stuff. Here's just the 6 domains that you have to deal with. And it's got its own policy builder, just like the other side. But here, there's no selecting, there's no kind of, searching for stuff. It just gives you the 4 controls or practices that you have to hit for level 1. So with all of that in mind, the scoring, the exporting, and everything else works the same. But what happened to all the old CMMC data of our users who are already on the platform? We have thought of that, and what we've done is on the new updated site that's coming out, we're going to have what's called the legacy CMMC data. And what we've done is we've literally taken the CMMC policy builder from Policy Pro per each person's account, and we've migrated that into its own repository. So what I can do here is I can select the level that I want to work on, just like we were using the policy builder currently on the live version. I can select level 3, I can select the domain that I want, and now I have all of the information I need. We can see that I have timestamps here from August of 2021. So this pulled all of my old data that I had done previous work on in the CMMC policy builder, and it maintained all of that information. So if I was working on CMMC against the recommendations of your awesome host today and Kevin and myself, your stuff is still there. We didn't get rid of it. We didn't remove it. We just made a new place for it to reside. And, maybe 6 to 12 months or at some point in the future, we might get rid of it. But we're not just throwing it away without letting you have a chance to get back into it and use it. So if if you didn't renew on your subscription or you're hesitant about what's going to happen to your data, the quicker you resubscribe, the more of a guarantee I can give you that it'll still be there. But if you wait another 6 to 18 months, it may not be there. But that's because of the amount of data plus the sensitive nature of it. We do have to purge it every now and again, but we're not doing that at this point in time because we understand that people put in a lot of effort and labor to build out their policy builder to where they are now. So we're retaining that information, making it available to all of our users right from the policy builder so they can go in and take care of what they need to take care of. But with that, Kevin, that does cover pretty much all the major changes coming in the next couple of weeks.
Great, Sean. It looks really nice. Looking forward to trying it out. So let me.
I wish I could say the same because I have been living and breathing
I
it
have to
for
say,
about 6 months now. So, yes.
of course. All right, everybody. So, want to encourage everybody, if you could do us a big favor and please fill out the exit poll. You'll see a link there in the YouTube description. I'm sorry. We're not done yet. We are going to do a Q&A session, but just want to prompt everybody to go ahead and please fill out that exit poll. Gives us a great opportunity to see what information you'd like to hear in our upcoming webinars, and also provides us feedback on how we're doing. So we did get about 9 or 10 questions submitted to us prior to the webinar. So I'm going to cover those with Sean. So let's see, Sean, and you covered quite a bit of this in the discussion and where, so we'll certainly point that out. But the first question we got is, what's the best CMMC 2.0 documentation templates available? Where can somebody go to find those? Now, obviously, Policy Pro is one of those, right? If you as part of the application, you include those templates,
Right.
but you provide the reference to those templates as well, so you take them directly to those. But just for the audience, kind of where would you suggest they go if they're just starting to research these?
So, and I'm removing the obvious bias that I have here. But the best template is the one that makes sense to you from a structural perspective, right? Because there's no MLA or APA formatting required here. It's you have set requirements. However you want to address that so that it makes sense to your organization and your people is what you should do, right? I've looked at, but I will warn you, there are not a lot of good templates to use online that are free.
Yeah.
Most of them will have a cost per policy family or domain. They'll have a cost for the package, but there's no additional support with that,
Right.
right?
Yep.
So with the Policy Pro template, if you want to use it, if you want to completely change it, doesn't matter a lick to me, but put it through the assessment, figure out what your key kennies are, address them, and then you can know that you have a document that not only did you just take a template and fill it out, but you assessed it, you reevaluated it, and went through with the management approval process to create that that paper trail to show that you're reviewing your documentation because they're
Right.
not static, right?
Right.
And the last point on this, again, with the free templates, it's more of a precaution to take. But any organization that willingly, without required or being required to put their policies online, probably do not have good policies.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I would encourage everybody, take a look at Policy Pro. It provides all of that information for you as part of the product. And then it goes through and does that scoring, if you will, of both making sure you included what was necessary, but also to make sure it's not just a copy and paste of something that somebody copied and pasted from the NIST 800 171 guidelines, which tell you the parameters of what you need, but not necessarily what you need.
Right.
So,
And I mean, the other route you can take too is to hire a consultant.
mhm,
Now, I mean, like if you have to get it done very quickly, that's a good way to go.
yep,
But keep in mind that if I pay someone to write these policies for me, I have to pay that amount of money out, which is definitely higher than what it costs to get a subscription to Policy Pro. But I still have to learn what they mean.
right,
And there's no better way to learn what something means and what's best for the organization than someone who's working for that organization and has their, point or their, I can't think of the word, that basically understand how the company works and what will and won't work, right? Because a
sure,
consultant, and I've done this, I've written wrote. My wife would have a heyday with that. I've written policies for folks, and I'm like, how strict do you want this? Do you want it like, super strict, or you just want it to kind of pass the mustard? And they're
yep,
like, oh, I want it super strict. And I'm like, I set it up and I do all this stuff for them. And then they go, we can't follow this.
right,
We don't have the expertise. We don't have the resources. We don't understand it. But they wanted a strict policy. So I wrote one.
yep,
If you write it yourself, you can control the narrative of that document because that's how you explain to anyone who asks how you handle cybersecurity.
absolutely. And that actually leads us very well to the next question, which is about like how specific do I need to be? So that question was, what specifics does the documentation need to include? And do I need to include things like screenshots and device configurations and standard settings, etc.? Or is it simply stating that the entity follows specific procedures to ensure compliance and requirements?
Right. So typically the policy is more of a guidance.
Hmm?
It's what are we doing? Right. And then in order to do that, we have to have certain processes in place. Right. In order to adhere to our own policies, we have to have a process. If I'm creating an account, there's a
Yep.
process I have to go through. It doesn't explain what the process is in detail, but then we have our procedures. And typically these are held in a separate manual because when you hand over your policy, you don't want them reading through the step-by-step instructions of your procedures. They may ask to look at one or two, but if it's already there in the documentation, and that's one of the things they actually removed from the maturity level requirements for CMMC. It used to be, you had to have your 999, which meant you had to have a policy. You had to have a 998, which was your procedures, and your 997, which was your resourcing. And the accreditation body said, no, you don't have to do that anymore. Just tell us what you're doing to meet the requirements. You don't have to do all this extra stuff. But that way, you know what you're doing in your organization. So the best people to work on that policy are going to be insiders.
Right. And that's and there is that difference, right? There are policies, there are the procedures you do to actually implement those policies. There are the things the auditors will look at to verify that you're doing what you say. Like they may look at a config file to say, okay, this is set up, as you indicated in your procedure, which was, which if you was outlined within the policy kind of thing. So it's those kinds of steps, right? And this and what Sean's talking about with Policy Pro, it's the definition of that policy.
Right. And the other thing that I want to just remind folks of is that while it's not 100% known how this will be handled, I was talking with an assessor a couple of, it's a couple of weeks ago now, but he was telling me that if you include your very specific procedures in the policy that is being certified, and then you change that procedure, they're not really sure how that would be as putting you out of compliance with your own policy because you're not following those procedural steps. So that's why his recommendation was, a separate procedural manual that you just reference to, because then you can change your procedures and it doesn't affect your policy. But
Good point.
just something to keep in mind when you're going through this process.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. So, in obviously in this world, there's a lot of people who work with MSPs and MSSPs to manage those IP, or I'm sorry, those IT processes and procedures. So, in those kinds of relationships, what part does that partner or provider play, and what part does the organization play?
Now, this will vary
Mhm.
from situation to situation. You have some MSPs who are more hands-on. You have some that are more just like, hey, yeah, we set it up, you figure it out. And their price will kind of clue you in as to which is which. But if you don't have the core competency, right, you don't have an on-staff IT administrator and you have a third party handling it, they should also be handling all your cybersecurity that has to do with it as well. But again, it may be spelled out in the SLA that you have with them, but you want to clarify which risks do I own and which risks
Right.
do you own? And that will vary from, situation to situation, because the last thing you want is to assume that your MSP is going to take care of that.
Yep.
And, we had a customer call in a little bit ago and they're like, hey, do I just submit the score I got on Policy Pro to SPRS? And I'm like, no, 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 that's not how that works at all. So I want to be very clear about it. You have to define who is doing what and when.
Right.
Because if you don't do that and you just assume they're going to do it, they're not privy to that thought process. So however it works out, define it yourself, right?
Yep. Yeah, and at the end of the day, the business should be the holder of those policies, if you will, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Right.
Because I mean,
They're yours.
yeah, they're your policies. They may have to interact with your MSP or MSSP. But again, that's communication in this kind of a thing is paramount. You have to tell people how you're going to deal with something, because if I don't tell them that I'm going to handle an incident and then they come in to handle an incident, we're just fighting each other now,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
define that up front with your MSPs and MSSPs, and it should alleviate a lot of the headaches with that.
Great. So I have a question about CUI documents that somebody currently has. So, are legacy CUI documents in scope for labeling?
Yes.
Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong here, Sean, but I typically think of, look, if you know that something is CUI data and you see it's not marked, then you really should mark it.
Right.
Right. It's one of those, it is the responsibility of the originating organization, but I always would say, err on the side of caution. If you know it's CUI data, just label it as such.
Right. And the other side of that coin is if you create CUI data, you have to mark it because it's originating with you.
Yeah.
So again, it's one of those tread carefully.
Yep. Okay. So another thing in that chain, if you will. So it is third-party software required to meet any standard? Not really required per se.
Yeah, I can't think of one in particular, like even like with HIPAA or with ISO, there's no hard and fast, like you have to use this piece of equipment to do that. Like you don't, but if there's a question about what types of technology, what types of device are appropriate for federal agencies, you can kind of use the transitive property there and say, well, if it's good enough for Uncle Sam, it's probably good enough for me. And that's in the 870 document
Mm-hmm.
from NARA. So that's the checklist of approved devices
Right.
for federal agencies. So that would be a good place to start. But these are also the approved things for government. So they, be careful that they're not outpriced because of that.
Okay. Fair enough. Let's see. Should an SSP include all the sub requirements listed in the assessor's guide?
It depends. Are you
Yeah.
going for a moderate baseline? Are you going for a high baseline? Like, are you going for, um, yeah, it's really going to depend on what you're doing.
Yeah, it really will. Wish we could be a little more definitive there, but that is certainly going to be one of those that it depends.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have a solid answer for that one.
Yeah. Let's see. Next one. So we're a small business with no CUI, sell slightly modified cots. What do you think? What level of CMMC certification will suffice?
Minimum level 1.
Yeah, that was my thing too, right?
Um,
If
but
yeah,
that's required of anyone who has a contract with the DoD or a
yep,
DoD contractor.
yep,
The problem is again specificity. What configuration are you setting them up to? What part of the government are you selling them to?
yeah,
Because if it's, oh, we're stocking a PX with, canned soup, okay, yeah, there's a very low likelihood that CUI will be involved.
right.
But if you're calibrating laboratory equipment, that could be CUI.
Yeah, and it is that slight, the comment they made and the slightly modified cots, right? And
Right.
so that, so what I would always suggest to anybody who asks these kinds of questions is look at your contracts and look at the subcontracts you have with others. They should spell out exactly what your requirements are. And if there is a question, ask.
Yeah,
Please
that's
go back and ask the entity in which you have that contract with, what's their expectation?
now to be fair though, and this is coming from about a year and a half ago when the 1.02 came out.
Yeah.
But I talked to probably about a dozen folks when that first came out, and they're like, I don't understand this. Why are they making me do all this? All I do is just pay, I paved their parking lot.
Mm,
I'm like, okay, so you're level 1. That's not a problem. They're like, yeah, but I just got a letter saying that I have to be level 3, but I don't have any CUI. So until there's solid evidence that the contracting officers are going to follow through on appropriately assigning level, I think there's still going to be that big hesitation about what level do I have to be. This is like, hey, I'm a one-person company. Doesn't matter if you touch CUI, you need level 2.
right.
So
Yeah.
it's going to come down to what's in your contract, what the contracting officer says. But we were hearing with the initial CMMC that they were all just like, yeah, everything's level 3.
Mm,
So
okay. Yeah.
it's
So ask.
Yeah, definitely ask, and don't just take a flippant answer as a response.
Right. Yeah.
Be like, explain to me why I have to do that.
Yeah. Okay. So hopefully during Sean's demonstration, we got the answer to this question. But the last question we got was, what constitutes that a policy is adequately documented? It says many times I've seen companies or consultants just copy and modify the CMMC statements, and they provide that as the policy.
So a cybersecurity policy document, just like almost any other, but very specifically for cybersecurity, never really achieves that, because you're doing the best you can at the moment to protect the information you have, and then a new threat comes up. So you have to change it and you have to modify it. That's why there's a requirement for review, that every 6 to 12 months you should go back and review. Are we receiving the same level of protection with what we're doing? Do we have to change it? Do we have to upgrade it? Do we have to modify it in order to meet the current threats that we're facing? A perfect example of this was SolarWinds, right? With their Orion software, where a authorized developer update got injected with malware, and because it was an authorized update patch, just like if it was a Windows update, prior to that incident, I was like, yeah, you could generally trust that a software developer's update patch would be good.
Yep.
And it wasn't, and it opened back doors into so many federal agencies that, like, I probably have way too many workstations in the office that are waiting for a Windows update because I just don't want to have to deal with the problems it's going to cause. But that wasn't something we had to worry about 2-3 years ago, but it is something I worry about now. So the documents will change. They're living documents that will change over time. But to answer the question, you have to feel good, right? And that's kind of nebulous. But what I mean by that is that you have to meet the requirements. You have to be attempting to do industry best practice, and you actually have to adhere to it. Because
Yep.
a failure in any one of those areas and the whole kit and caboodle comes apart, right? I've
Right.
talked to folks who are like, hey, my CEO won't follow the policy. Okay, find a compromise that he will follow, because
Update
if no one's
accordingly.
following the policy, what's the point of having one?
Right. Absolutely. Okay. Well, thanks for that. So just a reminder, please fill out that exit poll. So the companion tool, if you will, that Exostar has for people that are going through the NIST 800-171 compliance and or getting ready to start on the CMMC2 is our certification assistant. So, if you will, Policy Pro is that front end, right? That is where you can write the policies, get those policies checked, get a score against them, etc. Certification assistant is where you can validate how you're doing against those policies. It is, if you will, putting those policies into practice, doing that assessment of how you're doing. The output of this will be those things you need to be able to share out. It will be that SSP, right? That system security plan. Any open POAMs you have, because you may not either have a policy completed, you've just implemented a policy, you're changing a policy, etc. And it'll generate your SPUR score, which many of the primes are now starting to ask for, and which many of you are obligated to provide because of earlier contracts you have. This also has a free trial. I would encourage everyone to get both Policy Pro and Certification Assistant, because these two companion products will help you meet the needs of today in NIST and CMMC requirements.
And then, Kevin, just real quick, if I could add, because a lot of folks don't realize that if you haven't submitted a SPUR score, you're going to receive or at least be viewed as though you have the lowest score possible.
Right.
Right. So even just doing the assessment doesn't matter what you get, because anything's better than a -405.
Good point.
So if you haven't done it, they're going to look at you like the problem child and say, yeah, I don't think we can trust them.
Yep. Absolutely. And so, as many of you know, Exostar hosts a number of webinars and events throughout the year. I'm actually running it, hosting another session next week with Kyle Lai from KLC Consulting, where we'll talk, if you will, more about CMMC2. And I encourage everyone to attend that. We also have some additional information out there for you if you need to get better educated, understand these things a little more broadly. Looking for a CMMC accreditor out there to do an assessment for you, anything like that, please visit our website or some of these other helpful resources out there. So I want to thank everybody for coming today. Hopefully that you got some great information. I want to thank Sean for his conversation today as well.
As always, Kevin, it's wonderful to speak with you again.
Great. Thanks so much, Sean. Everyone have a great day, and we will talk to you all soon. Thanks.